Welcome to the Protection Pros podcast, brought to you by CPPS, the leading provider of workplace violence solutions. I'm your host, Stacey Brown. Join us as we explore the world of security leadership through the lens of the pros who live it. Mark Howard, how the heck are you?
I'm awesome. Thank you so much.
Good. Well, I appreciate you joining us here today. We've been friends for a very long time. Started way back in the military. That's where your security industry experience kind of started out. Then you went law enforcement. And then from law enforcement, you went security leadership with both healthcare and in K through 12 school district. So I would love to pick your brain, and that's what I plan on doing here. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to share some of this stuff. And if you're going to pick my brain, at least leave a little bit.
I'll try, Mark. I'll try. So if you can kind of give us a little bit of an overview as to that experience, kind of where did it all start out? Where did you find your passion? Kind of just a little overview would be helpful here.
Yeah. So a kid growing up in the Midwest and then joined the military. And so I knew when I was a junior in high school, I wanted to join the military. I wanted to do something cool. I mean, what teenage kid doesn't want to go do something cool, like dogs and berets and guns and all that kind of stuff, right? And then anyhow, it kind of fast forward, when I got to basic training, I was able to volunteer to be a survival instructor. And I didn't even know what that was. And honestly, I was a suburb kid. I mean, my father grew up on a farm outside of Kansas City, like with no running water, and he did not want to go camping, so he never took me camping as a kid, right? So I come up here to Spokane at Fairchild Air Force Base, and I learned everything it is about how to be a survival instructor. And so, you know, like most people that are like 18 years old, they don't know what excites them. They just know that they want to find something that is exciting. So eventually as I embraced this career of being a survival instructor and then later getting into survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, as it's called today.
Is SEER. That's what SEER stands for.
So when you hear SEER, what I discovered is that I absolutely love teaching adults. That's what I'm good at. That's what you hear people like Mike Rose say, don't follow your dreams, follow opportunity, right? And I had the blessing of being able to do both of those. So it was an opportunity. It was the ability to get to discover what I like, what I'm passionate about, and then so I was able to that was kind of the foundation. I mean, I think my parents did a pretty good job of turning me into a reasonable human being before I went off to the military. But then that experience as a survival instructor and the opportunities to lead people in wilderness, to actually give people the opportunity to build confidence. That's probably one of the best things about that part of my career. And even now, as I'm working in SEER, is to be able to, I view the person, and we all kind of have developed, I think, a lot as we learn how to teach adults. And I know I'm a different teacher now than I was. And I used to think like, all right, the student is an empty vessel and it's the instructor's job to fill that vessel. And then as I've discovered and as I've learned additional and had techniques for training adults and for just finding, reflecting on successes and teaching failures, that your job is to let the student or help the student find what is in their vessel.
That's right. Build their own skills that they kind of come to the training course with. And then you just help them find that empowerment to utilize those skills that are already there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so by them discovering what they have in them and you're guiding them along, then that's what really helps build the confidence, I think.
So that's great. So then you go from SEER, the survival school and instructor out there, to law enforcement. How was that transition?
Right. It was awesome, honestly, because in the military, we've been friends a long time and we know that environment. And as a person that's in the military, when you meet other military people, you instantly have this bond. And so when I got out of the Air Force, and I loved working in the Air Force. It was an awesome job, but I was looking for additional ability to promote and just grow my family and economic gain. I guess we all want to find additional rewards. So it was a natural transition. It was awesome because as a survival instructor, you are your individual achievement is absolutely necessary, but you're still part of a team. And then when I got into law enforcement, I found that as well. And so, like everybody, you go through the basic academy, work patrol, and then, so that's not teaching. But then in law enforcement, I was able to get to the point where I did have teaching opportunities. So I was the it's the TAC officer, training advisor counselor for the basic law enforcement academy here in Spokane, and then became a firearms instructor. And so teaching use of force, teaching policy, teaching firearms. So it's all these different learning domains too. So the kinesthetic or the motor skill, and then the affective domain, all these different domains of teaching that I know you're familiar with.
Right.
And then, and it was just, it kind of was this full circle, or again, going back to my passion about being able to teach adults.
Yeah. It's funny how even in that environment, you still found yourself, guided towards, teaching, instructing, things of that sort. So, I mean, your passion follows you then, in a sense, wouldn't you say? Yeah. And then from there, you transition to security leadership. So how did that all come to be?
So when I was working at the Basic Law Enforcement Academy, I got really spoiled working like regular hours during the day, weekends off, and it was a great job. And in law enforcement, typically, if you're going to promote, then you go down to the bottom of the puppy pile for seniority. So we could be back to graveyard or something like that, and that just didn't appeal to me. And so one of my colleagues within the law enforcement community said, "Hey, listen, I'm looking to transition to another position. And so would you be interested in looking at this job for being the security manager for Spokane Public Schools?" And so I went through the process, of course, and it was I had worked with educators a little bit in law enforcement just as we were, and I know we'll talk probably a little bit more about that as we go on here, but I did not know a lot about education, but I had the experience in law enforcement. I had just finished my master's degree in security management. So I kind of had, not to toot my own horn, but I kind of had all the stuff that would predict my success as a security manager, because I had the boots on the ground kind of experience as a police officer working in law enforcement, had the formal education, and then I went to that. And so, and it was a good learning experience, because there is such a difference between just doing regular patrol work and like as people think of seeing, police officers rolling around in a marked patrol car, and then transitioning to the security management world, where again, a lot of it was education, because the cultural differences were really interesting.
Yes. I would love to find out more about that.
Yeah, because it's very similar between the schools and also being a security manager in healthcare, because our job as security professionals is to realize that the world is an imperfect place full of imperfect people, and evil does exist out there, and evil looks for soft targets. Evil looks for vulnerabilities. Well, in education and healthcare, our people that are drawn to those industries, they don't think that way. They want to just enjoy the kids. They want to go. They go to work to teach kids. They go to work to take care of patients, and which is good. That's what I'm glad they're there for, that, because that's their work. That's their passion. But it's not in their minds typically to think that the world is an imperfect place. So as I discovered in both education and healthcare, is that it was really important to, again, educate folks like, yes, this is, it might seem really nice to just let a person sit in the emergency department waiting room when they're done getting treatment. But the problem is, when you're not watching them, they may be one of those imperfect people that as soon as you turn your back, they're off looking for vulnerabilities in the workplace. Whether it could be like stealing belongings from patients, or they are going off to parts of the facility that they're not supposed to. And then getting back to the schools, it is really about their focus and my focus as far as the difference between what they come to work thinking about and what I came to work thinking about. So,
yeah, that's interesting. You don't really think about that perspective, but being in security and then also being, an instructor and having that background, you have that ability to kind of see that vision through someone else's perspective, right? Yeah. And that probably followed you all the way back from the beginning of your career at the survival school, where it's like, how do I get to this one person that really just isn't getting it? Well, you got to put yourself in their shoes, right?
Absolutely.
And so your ability to be able to do that and kind of be that chameleon, like, how do I get to these people where security isn't at the forefront of their mind, right? But my job is to now protect them and get them to think about security and be security minded and all of that. How did you find ways to motivate them to think about these things, think about all the what ifs, and without instilling fear, right? Because that's the challenge. You don't want to scare them, right, but you want to empower them to have this kind of security mindset.
Yeah. So a couple of things there is like, and the words that you use to hopefully kind of make people think a little bit differently. Like we've all heard that phrase, be mindful, not fearful.
That's right.
And so a couple of things is one, speak in the language in a context that they are comfortable with. And I'm not saying, oh, you have to soften your language, but I mean, I got great advice from a guy that was a police officer in New York, and he worked for me at the school district. He had retired, and he goes, heed the context of your environment. So in other words, look, just be aware. Don't think that you can go into a group of people and just talk the way that you would talk to, let's say, a bunch of military folks or a bunch of police officers or something like that. Just be aware that way. Learn the language of the culture. So that was good. Going back to that, be mindful, not fearful. And then also another success that I found was find like-minded people within the organization. And it's not like they're cop wannabes or anything like that, but finding people that get it, that were in positions of leadership, and to be able to appeal to them. And so building these partners and building the relationships with people that, like, okay, yeah, I get it. You're right. We're here to teach kids and we're here to take care of patients, but also we do need to be concerned about this particular security vulnerability, or we need to think about if we have this situation, let's say, we would have in the schools, for example, we would have parental dispute or custody kind of issues kind of thing.
Right. So, yeah. That's interesting. So I kind of want to transition here. So I appreciate you explaining your background and that gives us a lot of insight into that. So now I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit about some specifics here. So going back to your time at law enforcement, I know one of the things that we teach at CPPS, as we're building policies and instructing on prevention and all of this, is intimate partner violence or domestic violence. That plays a big factor in workplace safety, in overall individual safety. So I'm sure that you've had your dealings with domestic violence situations, and I was kind of hoping that you could kind of walk us through some of those situations and kind of shed some of that insight or share some of that insight into kind of what that looks from a law enforcement perspective.
Yeah. So from the very beginning in the training, there's a lot of training done about dealing with domestic violence, because there is a good, I can't provide you the stats on it exactly, but there is a good amount of the work on a busy Friday night in Spokane, Washington, or probably anywhere USA,
right,
is responding to domestic violence calls. And, just like we know that in like concerning behaviors, how someone doesn't just snap, we know that it's a progression that gets to that point. That's very much the way, from my experience, of how domestic violence has, how it develops. It's not just, all of a sudden we're going to start fighting tonight to the point where the neighbors call the police. But it's this progression of the control and the economic control of the partner and the isolating the partner, all that stuff that we know that from the progression of people that are controlled and degraded as a person in this awful scenario or this relationship. Yeah. And so one of the things that I really got from that is, one, it's very dangerous, because when it's time, like you come and you do your investigation, it's like, wait a minute, I don't really want him to go to jail after all. And then everybody changes their mind. And so that can change behaviors, or it becomes dangerous that way.
Protect what you can't afford to lose with the Safe Workplace Suite by CPPS, the leading provider of workplace violence solutions. Empower your people, protect your brand, and align with standards. The Safe Workplace Suite includes everything your workplace violence program needs, like assessments, plans and policies, e-learning, instructor training, and behavioral threat support. CPPS is trusted by over half the Fortune 100 and endorsed by ASIS International. So visit safeworkplacesuite.com or check the show notes for more information. So you're saying there's this progression, right?
Yep.
People don't just snap. There's this long progression of this buildup, right? So by the time law enforcement gets called into this situation, we're kind of at the pinnacle of this, right?
yeah.
Would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just come to a head finally where it's come to violence. Maybe there was the arguing and maybe there was all these other things that were going on, and then it's finally escalated to violence. And so, and as I look at it and as it relates to workplace violence, it just what you said, it's like boiling the frog, a little bit, where it just it gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and before you know it, you're cooked. And the frustrating thing for law enforcement, at least at the time, was people want you to find a solution for they have spent months or years for a problem they created, right? So you get in there, but what I really, as I'm saying that, it makes me think about how it relates to workplace violence prevention, is that you don't have to wait for it to progress like that. I mean, through training, through awareness, through making sure that employees and leaders are looking for the indicators of these behaviors, these concerning behaviors.
Yeah, right.
That in law enforcement, I never had that history, and I could never see that. I just showed up when everything was bad.
Right.
But in the workplace, taking that is so, I see the value of being able to see if these indicators are happening, these behaviors, and they're identified and they're addressed at that much lower level, then wow, what a way better outcome. Because that way the police don't get called, nobody's getting hurt, stuff isn't getting damaged, and so that's a way better outcome.
Right. And so that's what it's about. So it's about educating everybody on this issue of what are those signs, what do we look for, what do we do about it when we see it, right? The whole see something, say something, what does that look like? But, one thing we hear a lot when we're out teaching workplace violence and awareness and prevention and all that stuff is, well, is this my business? Is it my business to get involved in someone else's relationship? So what would you say to that question? Is it my business?
I love that question, because I think that's the challenge. Anytime you're talking about addressing people's behaviors, I look at it as the difference between having a friend and having a neighbor. So you're my friend. So we would know what's going on in each other's personal lives. And if you're something that your daughter was doing, or, an event for her, or like if there was a death in your family or something like that, you could call me and we could talk about it on a personal level.
Right.
But like your neighbor, let's say people in your neighborhood, you're aware of what's going on in their lives to some degree. You kind of know their comings and goings. You know what their normal routine is. You wave to each other, but you don't share that kind of intimate kind of information at all. It just, and that's the best way that I have found to explain to people. I don't want people in my business, and I don't really want to get in people's business either. But the difference as we interact with people, if you're a friend versus a neighbor, that's kind of the best way that I can explain that.
Well, because when it comes to our workplace, when it comes to our community, when it comes to our neighborhoods, our shopping centers, it becomes all of our business, right?
Yeah.
And it puts all of us at risk. And so it's like, what can we do in that buildup, right? So let's talk for a moment about response strategies, right? So responding to one of these calls and you have everybody escalated, tensions are running high, right? So how do you de-escalate something like that when people are at their all-time pinnacle of emotions?
Yeah. You kind of do a quick triage. So first of all, I like to to look at it like, okay, if it's an emergent situation, you've got to act. You do the best information. You got your OODA loop. You've made the decision and you've acted, right? If it's not emergent, is to take a breath and slow down a little bit and really start to take the information in as best you can. I mean, if there's something's not on fire and people aren't shooting at each other or they're assaulting each other, you have that time to, obviously, if it's emergent, you just get right into it. One of the things that was very helpful is to kind of get down to the root cause. So listen to what people are saying. Identify their emotions. We know how vital that is to address people's emotions as we are managing people that are in crisis.
Yeah, and that's what we teach, right? Like the emotions are so much bigger than usually what it's over. And so you have to address those emotions before you can get down to that content and then find that resolve or that way out of that situation, right?
Yeah.
So can you give us an experience where, somebody was heightened and you had to de-escalate them and you had to kind of get through that emotion and down to what was motivating them? Or
So went to this crazy call as a law enforcement officer. Went to this house, just a single story house, had a basement, and so a girlfriend called. It was a domestic violence situation. Things had finally escalated. So the suspect, he's down in the basement, and girlfriend says he's got a gun. And so I'm standing there in the kitchen, knowing that my body armor protects me from projectiles from this direction, but not underneath. I guess that's why guys back in different wars would sit on their helmet when they were flying an airplane, right?
Yeah.
So they could get some protection from that direction. And I'm like, this is not cool. I mean, she says he's got a gun in the basement, and he's below me. But one of my coworkers was there and just started talking to him. I know it sounds really academic, but started identifying the emotions, because he had other warrants. He was going to go to jail. It was just a matter of how he was going to go to jail.
Got it.
And so this sounds so simple. The guy basically boiled down to this. If I can smoke a cigarette before I go to jail, I'll come out of the basement.
No kidding.
Yeah, that was it. I just want to have a cigarette before I go. And so, fine. I mean, how can you argue with that, because that way you're not stacking up and going down with guns to try to, it's such a disadvantage going downstairs to take a guy you'd believe to be armed. And as it turned out, he wasn't armed. And so everybody was happy. He got to have his cigarette before we took him into custody and took him to jail. And I know that sounds like, wait a minute, you can't just solve every domestic violence or some big crisis with letting somebody have a cigarette. But it's a good example. And what I learned from that, it doesn't matter what I think that person might be motivated by. It's identifying what is important to them, whether it's the emotion, whether it was as simple as a cigarette or whatever it is. It doesn't matter what you think.
Having these simple conversations, right? Yeah. Trying to get down to the bottom of what is going to de-escalate this situation, and so we can move forward and at that moment in time get him into custody.
Yeah.
Right. So which could have been a bad situation had you have approached it just like a black and white situation, right? Like a one size fits all kind of model.
Right.
It's not going to work in these situations where people are, really escalated.
And it's hard sometimes because you're like, okay, I need to get this done. I got another call to go to. But again, that kind of goes back. If you can just take a little, if you have the luxury of the time to do something or to take all the information in and build your plan and identify that's the key to being safe. I mean, and that's the ultimate result. That's the ultimate goal, right? Is that we want to be safe. We want a safe outcome. And then it may be a much lower level in the workplace, but the thing, you still can apply the same principles. And that's what I like about like what we teach here.
De-escalation principles.
The de-escalation principles.
They seem so simple, but they really are so effective if you don't overcomplicate it, right?
Yeah.
And if you just approach it on an individual basis, and like I said, not that one size fits all model, like here's this formula and it's going to work great if I just do this, this, and this, but really you're dealing with human behavior, which can be very complex, but very simple at the same.
Yeah. The KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid.
Keep it simple, stupid. There you go.
Yeah.
So Mark, as we're discussing this and as, we kind of dove through all of your experience here, I know that with all of this knowledge and background, you probably have a lot of lessons learned. You probably have some solid advice for those that are in the security industry or those that are in the fields that you found yourself in. What would kind of be the one thing that you would want people to really understand about being in this profession and working in these kind of volatile situations?
Yeah, wow, that's a
big question.
That's a big bunch of stuff. But I don't know. There's probably like my top three kind of things.
Okay.
One is if you're training people, train them right.
Mm-hmm.
So like we have that law of primacy, law of recency. Those. So don't. So when you're developing training and you're developing programs, that old expression, "There's always time to do it right a second time." But we don't want to do that, is because people will, when they first learn the skills, whether it's a motor skill or whether it's the skills that you need for identifying and emotions or concerning behaviors and de-escalation, is do it right the first time, because you don't want to create training scars on people.
Right.
And just an old example is the 60s or 70s. Anybody that wants to go look at the Newhall shooting, Newhall, California, where these police officers were in a shooting with a bad guy or bad guys, and they, and some of them had gotten killed and seriously injured. They look in their pockets of the dead officers, and they found spent shell casings in their pockets. And it's like, why do they have spent shell casings in their pockets? Because when they were at the basic academy with their revolvers, again, this is like years and years ago, and we use the term range Nazi. They're the range master generally has to kind of be that way sometimes. And plus, they have all these, but they had trained that every time that they had fired their weapons on the range, that they would immediately pick up their brass and put it in their pockets.
Oh, interesting.
To keep the range clean. Like that was the important thing, not the tactical aspect of how terrible that is. So these guys had actually put themselves in harm's way and even gotten shot and killed because of that training scar.
Wow. So in the heat of the moment, they were sitting there picking up brass.
Yep.
And wow, that's interesting. I mean, the military is always big on saying train as you fight, right?
Right.
So that's a big principle. And that creates that muscle memory, right? That's why you should practice all these skills, these response strategies, this run, hide, fight. Even if it's just in your head going through, what would I do right now if, right?
Yep.
And then that way you have that muscle memory. So in the heat of the moment, you're just relying on that memory to kind of kick in and be like, oh, this is what I do at this moment in time. So that's an interesting lesson.
So train right. The other thing is and I'm really focused on the training aspect here, but make sure, we always hear that practice makes perfect. Well, perfect practice makes permanent. It's that practice that makes permanent. Yeah, I know it's kind of a mouthful. But
say that again.
Perfect practice makes permanent.
Okay, that's a lot of P's in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of. That's prior preparation prevents piss poor performance.
That's right. That's right. Okay, that's good though. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So, Mark, you said there was 3. What's the third principle you would like people to walk away with?
In emergencies, the first information you get is almost always wrong.
Oh, interesting.
and I know that sounds also, and it's not 100% of the time, but it is often and in today's, and I don't mean to sound like an old guy, but in today's world where it's about how quickly you get information out, not how accurate it is, that often drives communication out there in the social media world. So I'll give you an example. Back at, it's one of our large high schools here in Spokane. These kids, to celebrate a buddy's birthday, they made an overpressure device. So basically they had taken like an MRE, a meal ready to eat heater, and it's just a chemical. They're just household chemicals. Right. You put it in a plastic bottle, you add water or whatever it is, put the cap on, and it blows up. Okay. So they did 2 of those in the school. So people get a little excited when you hear an explosion in a high school, or 2 explosions, because that's what it sounds like, an explosion. So we were responding up there to the school at the time, and I had looked at the local news station here. They had posted, pipe bomb explodes near high school. Okay, so you put that out there, and then what does that do to everybody else? It's like they have kids or grandkids.
Oh yeah, everybody's
going ape to to want to know what's going on. And so, and I tried to go back and find it, but they quickly got rid of that because once we did the investigation, once again, trust the investigation process. That's another thing, another big takeaway for security leaders, security managers, people is trust the investigation process and allow it to happen. Take your time if it's not an emergency, as I mentioned before. And so we get there, we find out what it all is, but it is, and we got the information. It was just kids doing a prank, but man alive, we went from it was a prank to, oh my God, it's a pipe bomb to, okay, it's a prank. And so there was no damage. There was nobody in danger at the time. So,
yeah. Well, that's interesting because so much of the time we focus on, response, right? Response, but it's what about recovery? What does that process look like, right? And so it's like as you're talking about now prevention, so your readiness and your response, like don't leave out recovery.
Yeah.
And train to what that investigation process will look like. And so that's a good lesson learned here. Anything else, Mark, you'd like to say, parting words, anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about?
I think, the last thing I'll say is it is awesome to have successes, but it's probably more valuable to have failures.
Oh, interesting. That negative learning, right?
Right. Yeah.
We know something about that.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. And it's, and in a nutshell, being able to find people that are like-minded. I mentioned that before, but building a team and then being able to educate and take the time to help people understand. First of all, you show them you want to understand the world from their perspective. And then you build that relationship to be able to share your perspective. Because when people come to work, the last thing they're thinking about is security or law enforcement concerns.
Right.
That's just not the way most people's minds work. They're happy to just get to work, do their thing, and go home, and hoping that nothing bad is ever going to happen. And the other thing that I guess I would put out to folks is that the high impact, low frequency event is so key because we love to be in the zone for preparedness of high frequency, low impact events. We do that stuff all the time. But it's when all of a sudden we've got anything in the middle or that high impact, low frequency where we don't think about it. We definitely haven't trained for it. And then when it does happen, but here's the good news. We have great people in this industry and they're going to make the best decisions that they can. And do the best you can with the information that you have, because making no decision is never an option. You have to be able to, if you're a leader, be a leader. And if you're not the leader, follow the orders or the directions of those that are the leaders.
Good followership.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I often find in our industry that everybody wants to be the leader. And lead, follow, or get out of the way.
Lead, follow, or get out of the way. I love that, Mark.
So if you're in charge, be in charge. If not, be that supportive, awesome worker bee to do what you're asked to do. And knowing the difference between those two situations.
Or get out of the way. If you know you don't have it in you, then get out of the way and let others, take charge or let others follow or do whatever they need to do. So that's lead, follow, or get out of the way, Mark. I think that's a good way to end this. I appreciate you joining us here. And I appreciate your time. So thank you so much. That was a lot of insight.
Awesome. My pleasure.